Well, imagine your loved one unjustly loses his or her life, and after you say your final goodbyes and you're left with grief, someone says to you, sorry, there will be no justice, no accountability.
And that is the harsh reality, the harsh truth of something called government immunity. Put simply, in Michigan, cities, counties, the state itself, in most cases, are not liable for their negligence, even when it results in injuries or even death. The same protection includes government workers and public officials. And far too many everyday families, burdened and grief-stricken, are left to ask, how can this be? They are some of the most disturbing cases.
Shots fired in the building. I heard somebody say somebody was shot in the head.
Tragic.
They're beating them up, like they're literally assaulting them.
And often preventable.
If we wouldn't have left, we both would have died because the water level came up so fast.
It's difficult to know that he could still be here if somebody did their job.
But in the end, the victims rarely receive the justice they deserve.
Thinking that one day this man will be set free and he can come after us and do the same thing to us, the same thing that he did to our son.
All because of something called government immunity.
There are times I get angry. There's a lot of times I just get sad. I'm angry, especially for the 4 that didn't come home that day.
And like Megan Gregory, her family and others whose lives forever changed after the Oxford school shooting, you don't realize it until it happens to you.
It was just a normal day like any other day. Until I started getting the text messages. And, he was, help, Mom. I'm in the bathroom, there's gunshots.
Her son Keegan frantically texted his parents from the Oxford bathroom as he hid in a stall with help from classmate Justin Schilling. Sadly, not for long.
They heard him change his magazine. And then he kicked the door into the stall and just stared at both of them for a while. And then Keegan said he had heard the door open, so they thought he left. But then we found out months later that was actually security guard opening the door, but she never came in.
One of the many decisions by a school employee that would prove to have deadly consequences. Minutes later, the 15-year-old shooter ordered Justin and Keegan to show themselves. That teenage gunman, Ethan Crumbly, then shot fatally Justin at close range without mercy. Keegan made a run for it and survived.
He walked in and I immediately grabbed him to hug him, and he just kind of stood there, just empty. His eyes were not the same. Like, that was the one thing I noticed. His eyes were very different. They were dark.
Keegan escaped certain death, but his mom says he will never be the same. A total of 11 people, 10 kids and 1 adult were shot that fateful day. 4 of them, all students, murdered in cold blood. Ethan Crumbly has already pleaded guilty to 24 criminal charges, and in a precedent-setting move, the 15-year-old's parents will be heading to trial on charges of involuntary manslaughter. But attorney Ben Johnson, who is suing the Oxford School District and employees on behalf of the victims' families, has hit a major roadblock. Public school employees are protected by government immunity. That's right. Remember when we said government workers were protected? That goes for public school employees as well.
I don't think that there could be a more blatant example of how bad governmental immunity is than the Oxford cases.
Government employees in Michigan, including public school employees, are not liable unless it can be proven their gross negligence is the proximate cause of the injury and damage. Johnson firmly believes the shooter could have been stopped and since uncovered layers of negligence. Oxford didn't have a threat assessment plan. School employees ignored the results of Ethan's behavioral test, which showed he was suicidal and at risk, high risk, for anger and violence. Teachers reported Ethan's disturbing drawings, troubling comments about his parents, and even catching Ethan in class searching for ammunition on his phone. searching for ammunition on his phone. And then this. The day of the shooting, a teacher saw a drawing of a gun with the words, "The thoughts won't stop. Help me." Ethan's parents were called to the school that day and told to get their son counseling. Instead of sending him home to treatment or searching his belongings, school officials handed Ethan his backpack and sent him back to class. After the massacre, police discovered Ethan's gun, ammunition, and manifesto inside his backpack.
All the time. I think about every prevention that could have happened that day.
Especially the security guard. Surveillance video shows the security guard walking in and out of the bathroom where the armed 15-year-old had Keegan and Justin cornered. She claims she didn't intervene because she thought it was a training exercise. But all of that evidence and more wasn't enough for the judge, who determined the negligent acts of the school employees was not the direct cause of the shooting. Ethan was. So the judge dismissed the district and its employees from the lawsuit.
People do not understand how evil this is. This is government dictating this to you and saying, "Ha, you can't hold me accountable."
No one knows this better than Ben Johnson, who has filed several lawsuits on behalf of victims who he claims have had their constitutional rights violated and are trying to hold public officials accountable.
Hey, stay in the car. Do you have a driver's license? Do you speak English? No. Stop. 1915. Got one running. Stop resisting.
26-year-old Patrick Loyola shot in the back of the head by Grand Rapids police officer Christopher Scher. Johnson is trying to hold the city of Grand Rapids, its police department, and the ex-officer accountable for policies that allowed racial profiling and excessive force that violated Loyola's civil rights and led to his murder. But police are also protected, not liable for negligent acts.
So it is a symbol of justice. So those people that say it's only about money, they've never been hurt by somebody and then had their government basically laugh in their face and say, "You can't sue me, haha."
Johnson also filed a lawsuit on behalf of hundreds of Midland County victims who lost everything in the 2020 Edenville Dam failure.
We had a big farmhouse there, 2,400 square foot farmhouse with 2 pole barns. Had quite a bit into it, about $500,000 into it, and lost it all in about 12 and a half minutes.
This lawsuit shows that state and federal regulators never made the dam owners follow any of the rules, even though they ignored safety issues and ongoing concerns. The regulators' defense, you guessed it, government immunity. And right about now, you may be asking yourself, why does this apparent double standard even exist? Well, in Michigan, government immunity and something called the Tort Liability Act that dates back to the 1960s. It allows government agencies and employees to do their jobs without the constant threat of being sued for their actions or decisions.
Well, I think that the level of the immunity and the way that the definition is written for the immunity needs to be changed.
Former Michigan Appellate Court Judge Amy Ronayne Krause, who spent years on the bench hearing cases against the government, says most are thrown out because of the complicated process to file and how the statute is interpreted. To sue someone protected by any level of government immunity, you must prove the person's conduct was grossly negligent and the conduct was the proximate cause of any injuries or damages. What does that mean? Well, basically, when the word grossly was added to negligent or gross negligence and a proximate cause was changed to the proximate cause, it made it nearly impossible in Michigan for someone to sue a government worker and make them or their department pay for their mistake.
What's happened is the courts have interpreted that as a very, very high standard. I think that it could be that our courts would not necessarily have to keep considering it that way. There could be changes because laws change when Supreme Courts change.
And that time could come soon. Since the Engler administration, traditionally conservative judges have upheld government immunity. But the dynamic has since changed, with Democrats controlling the state legislature. The Michigan Supreme Court recently proposed doing away with an old rule that grants automatic appeals for government entities and workers who are being sued. For victims, it meant years of delays before their cases can even be heard.
I remember my attorneys telling me, most people don't win against the government.
Like James King, who has been waiting 10 years for justice. King, a college student at the time, was walking down a Grand Rapids street when an undercover FBI agent and police officer mistook him for a petty thief suspect. The officers proceeded to choke and beat the 20-year-old, and to the point that bystanders called 911 thinking they were witnessing a murder.
Instead of just saying, "Oh my gosh, we're so sorry, this was just a big mix-up," and letting him go, they charged him with several felonies related to resisting this unlawful arrest, and the Kent County Prosecutor's Office took him all the way through a jury trial, and he was acquitted on all counts.
The king can do no wrong. That's how government immunity started centuries ago, in the days of British common law. But as we've seen, government can do wrong, and in many cases should be held accountable.
They're beating him up. Like, they're literally assaulting him.
When I was being choked, I feared for my life.
James King choked and beaten until he was unconscious by two plainclothed officers who thought he was this guy. Clearly it's not, and a jury agreed acquitting King on all counts. But 10 years later, King's lawsuit against the officers who beat him senseless is still waiting for the green light.
There are a million tools in the toolkit of the government's attorneys that allow them to thwart constitutional accountability at every turn and put all sorts of pressure on the victims of constitutional abuse to ensure that they just won't bring the case at all.
Tactics attorney Patrick Giacomo knows all too well. As a lead attorney with the nonprofit law firm Institute for Justice, he works tirelessly to hold local, state, and federal government officials accountable when they violate a person's constitutional rights.
There is a clear conflict of interest here. And the state deciding whether you're allowed to sue the state or whether to sue its employees, for which the state will be liable to, is inevitably going to say, no, you can't.
Why should government workers be immune? Are they above the law?
Well, it's interesting that you would make the distinction between, some of them are just maybe neglectful and some of them are malicious. And I think one of the things that happens is that governmental immunity does hold the government liable. A lot of times people think that governmental immunity is just this free pass, so it excuses bad behavior, and that's not true at all. What it does is provide ample accountability while still leaving the resources to be able to provide the services that we need to provide.
Solicitor General Ann Sherman, who is the top appellate lawyer for the state, says for governments getting sued, the stakes are high. Eliminating immunity would mean tax dollars would go toward paying damages to victims instead of funding emergency services, public programs, and fixing infrastructure. Sherman fears frivolous lawsuits and forced settlements would also have public servants working in fear.
Very often they're making decisions that require split-second thinking. They're working under constrained budgets, and they don't have the ability to say, I'm not going to work with that student today. I'm not going to go into that burning building. They can't do that. And so that's why we draw the line where we do.
The video that sparked a national outcry showing an officer kneeling on Floyd's neck.
In 2020, the murder of George Floyd thrust the issue of government immunity into the spotlight. Horrified by the police officers' actions, the House passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which would have abolished immunity for police officers. But it never made it past the Senate because critics said it was another way of saying abolish the police. And frivolous lawsuits would force officers to quit because they could no longer afford to serve. Although insurance, the government, or school district foots the bill for damages, not the individual. Colorado, New Mexico, Montana, Nevada, Connecticut, and New York City have either eliminated qualified immunity, government immunity, or limited its application in court cases. So far, those states and city are showing reform does not equal lawlessness, and essential services continue.
I think we also need to be concerned about the flip side of the coin. When we provide such sweeping protection against accountability, does that cause people to act more badly? Does that cause people to be less careful? I think it does.
Hey, we're going in, we're staying here. What are we doing?
If there were no protections in place, would officers in Uvalde, Texas, storm the school right away and not waited over an hour while children inside called 911? Would Oxford teachers and counselors taken Ethan Crumbley's drawings and actions more seriously, checked his backpack, or chose not to send him back to class? Would police only use necessary force instead of deadly brutality?
Let's make sure that people have access to justice.
State Senator Jeff Irwin is planning to re-propose legislation that would tweak the language of the law, respecting the challenges government employees face while giving them culpability rather than a free pass.
The laws have been written in such a sweeping way that I think that they've caused a lot of folks who have real claims of injustice, real bona fide claims, it's caused those people to not even have a chance to get into court and make their claim. And I think that's wrong.
And I do think that over time, if this sort of accountability is reintroduced to our system, that lots of government officials will pause before they do things that might or definitely will violate individuals' constitutional rights.
But right now, there is no incentive for lawmakers or the courts to change the rules regarding government immunity, especially since they are the ones who are being protected. The state banks on the fact that victims don't have the knowledge, time, money, or attorney willing to fight immunity laws, unless, of course, you are Attorney Ben Johnson, who says he plans to take the cases all the way to the Supreme Court.
No one is above law. I'm not saying that their rights should be lower. Put them right on par with everybody else.
Johnson believes if more people were aware of the consequences of governmental immunity, there would be outrage.
How many more times will this continue if we can't learn from our mistakes? And how are we going to learn from our mistakes if we can't be honest about them?
Are all the same people still working there that were involved in that day?
Yes.
In early May, a key victory. A federal judge ruled the families of the Oxford victims could pursue claims that the Oxford district pushed Ethan Crumbley closer to violent action. But the civil rights violations lawsuit, looking to pin part of the responsibility on the district and some employees, still has a long way to go. For the Oxford school employees who turned a blind eye or dropped the ball that day, no consequences, no criminal charges, business as usual. Until immunity laws change and the civil suit can proceed, the families say their painful search for the truth and justice will continue.
I feel like we're constantly victimized. It's hurtful. It almost feels like we don't matter. Like, sorry, they're protected.
I want to point out, depending on the employee's role, there are different levels of immunity and a few exceptions to the law. But bottom line, government employees and their departments are generally not liable for their negligent acts. Lawmakers are the ones who have the power to change the government immunity laws. If you feel strongly about this, call your representative.
Such an interesting story that highlights not just when it comes to school shootings, but flooding victims and people across the board and spectrum of so many issues that they've dealt with, and then have to then deal with the consequence of not being able to hold someone accountable. Taryn, I had a question though. The Solicitor General told you that this is not a free pass. They're not off the hook. And I think she said that this basically holds them to ample accountability. How does it hold them to ample accountability if they're immune?
She believes that that it is fair, that there are ways to still hold that these government workers, public workers accountable, and that you can take them to trial and have a jury hear the case. But many people point out that's not the case. So there are some exceptions to the law, and that when it comes to keeping highways in reasonable repairs and public buildings, making sure that the conditions are safe. But let's put it this way. If I own a building, you trip and fall, or a business, you can sue me. If I go to a private school and something like this happens, like what happened at Oxford, I can sue. You can't do that at a public school. So there are major differences and big issues when it comes to government immunity, and there's a lot of people that feel like that there needs to be something in the middle where there is people still being held accountable, and yet those public services are protected.
Lawmakers like Mr. Irwin want to see some more change. We'll see what they can do in Lansing. In the meantime, we wait and we watch.
You are right. Thanks for
Tara.